Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. California North Coast Media and Pixel Corps are proud to present tonight's candidate forum for our new U.S. Congressional District 2, which spans the coast from north of the Golden Gate Bridge to the Oregon border. I'm Jason Davies, and together with Connie Madden, we're excited to moderate tonight's forum. Our goal this evening is to help inform you of the experience and views of the candidates while engaging you in the process leading to the election of our next representative in Congress. We are pleased to have with us tonight all declared candidates, but we only learned of Andy Caffrey's bid for Congress this morning. So unfortunately, he will not be participating in tonight's forum. However, we spoke with the other candidates and they agreed to give him an opportunity to have a 2-minute opening statement. So at this point, I would like to present Andy Caffrey for Congress.
Hi, I'm Andy Caffrey. I live in Humboldt County and I was the first candidate to enter this race. I'm a registered Democrat, but I'm running to give Democrats a chance to vote Green. I'm a co-founder of both of the Green parties in the United States, the Citizens Party in 1979 and the Green Party in 1985. And I'm running because the climate crisis is so severe and the economic crisis so severe that nothing short of a national emergency declared by President Obama and an all-out effort to rebuild our economic infrastructure to a post-fossil fuel, post-nuclear one will be adequate to meet the task. I'm also an Earth First founder. I'm an organizer. I work for the homeless and for veterans. I was the world's first genetic engineering grassroots organizer, and the BBC considers me a world historic figure for that reason. My campaign is around a set of proposals called New Green America. And they are, number one, fight the climate crisis as threat number one. Number two, rebuild America's infrastructure around bioregions and sustainability to meet all our needs as close to home as possible. 3, tax the rich. 4, Medicare for all and expansion of the social safety net. 5, retreat the U.S. empire. It's not enough just to end the wars. Use the military only to defend Americans and their U.S. property. 6, end corporate personhood. 7, legalize marijuana and end the war on drugs. 8, prosecute the Bush administration for crimes against humanity, war crimes, torture, and murder. And lastly, electoral reform and paper ballots. Get corporate money out of our elections. If you elect me, since I have a background in green politics, you will be electing the first green, true green, in United States history. And that, to me, would be the antidote to the Tea Party. We would get a lot of attention to the real alternative, not the Tea Party bogus alternative. And I'm also the only candidate who can represent the entire district, as I've lived in all 6 counties and worked on projects for 20 years. So please check out my website, caffreyforcongress.org, and I look forward to seeing you at the next debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. We look forward to a lively and respectful forum this evening, and again want to thank the candidates for their participation. The seating arrangement, order of opening remarks, order of question responses for the first question, and order of closing remarks have all been determined fairly, drawing names of the candidates from a hat. Each candidate will give an opening statement no longer than 2 minutes and a 1-minute closing statement. If one candidate is mentioned by name or feels a need to respond, we can allow for a 30-second rebuttal. We will continue with questions for 90 minutes with a brief break and return for 30 minutes of in-studio and online audience questions posted and ranked in real time via the website cncm.us. After the webcast, this program will be available through the YouTube as well as many online media outlets, including our own local Petaluma Community Access, PCA. Without further ado, let us begin. We're going to start with the opening remarks. And the first person doing the opening remark will be Daniel Roberts.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Dan Roberts is my name, and as Jason has mentioned, the new, we call it the new 2, the second district, is such an expansive district that we need more programs like this to get our message out to the electorate. So we thank Pixel and the California North Coast Media for hosting this event. So the question is, why would I want to run for this important post, federal post? And the answer is that there are some very serious issues facing us. I think most of us would recognize. And they are war and peace, they are taxation and spending, and the border. My three big issues. Those are my big three issues that I'm concerned about. Well, in terms of debt and deficit, I've been working for 4.5 years with both sides, the minority and the majority in the House in D.C. I get back there 4 or 5 times a year for the last 4.5 years. I've been working actively on the to modify the Dodd-Frank bill, and it was in the hopper, and now we're doing more as we go on with that. It's a tremendous burden for the economic system. A lot of costs involved with that. And so what I hope to bring to Congress is the ability to problem solve where the need is the greatest. So I have a background in finance, war and peace. We'll talk about that later, and the board will certainly talk about that. Look to danrobertsforcongress.com, and please stay tuned as we move forward with these debates. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And the next candidate with an opening statement will be Jared Huffman.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Connie, for hosting this forum tonight. And I also want to thank all of my fellow candidates for stepping up to this important challenge of running for Congress. It's going to be a big year ahead, and I am honored to be part of this event tonight with all of you. I'm Jared Huffman, and for the last 5 years I've represented the North Bay in the State Assembly. Prior to that, I was a senior attorney for an environmental group called NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council, and I've also spent 12 years in local government. And I am excited to run for Congress because I've spent my entire career working in the public interest, and not just talking about issues, but actually producing results. Over the last 5 years, I've faced some serious gridlock and dysfunction in Sacramento, but I've been able to overcome it and pass more than 50 pieces of successful legislation. And we just got some great news yesterday that Governor Brown has signed another one of my bills, this one a very, very important bill, AB 42, that is going to help us keep our state parks open. I want to take this get-it-done approach to government back with me to Congress. The next representative for this incredible coastal district is going to have a huge job ahead of them. It's going to be very challenging, especially now with this very toxic tone that we see in Washington, D.C. And so certainly it's important that we elect someone with the right values, the right skill set, but also very important that we elect someone with a demonstrated record of getting things done. And that's what I've done. We don't need more rhetoric. We don't need more sloganeering in Washington. They're actually pretty good at that in Congress. We need results on things like job creation, sensible deficit reduction, ending the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and bringing our troops home and then taking care of them once they get home, and reinvesting in education. These are the things that I want to do as your next member of Congress. I hope you'll support me, and I look forward very much to our discussion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared. And the next candidate will be Norman Solomon.
Thank you, and thanks to everybody for bringing us here together this evening, and to everybody who's watching. We're facing a wide range of crises right now. Global warming, we're seeing environmental problems in our own communities and around the world. We're seeing enormous distress. People are suffering. And so when we look at all of these problems, from the expansion of class size, to the lack of jobs, to the dominance of Wall Street in terms of our economic possibilities, I could go all night, and I won't, about the problems that we face. People feel them acutely. As I've gone up and down the coastal district, I hear from people who are saying, we've got to get jobs. We have to reverse this shrinking of our local and state and federal government services. We are in distress. We are suffering. And at the core of these problems, I think, are two fundamental dynamics that need to be dealt with, acknowledged, and changed. One is the dominance of corporate power, the way in which Wall Street runs roughshod over Main Street, the way in which Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington is dominated by Wall Street. We need to be real about that dynamic in everyday life. And also there's a dire shortage of democracy. Well, if you go to the campaign website, SolomonForCongress.com, you'll see my programs, you'll see the issues listed, you'll see the delineation of the fact that our campaign is refusing to take a single penny of corporate PAC money. Our campaign is grassroots. We're addressing those two fundamental problems of corporate power on Wall Street dominating our lives, And also we're addressing the dire shortage of democracy through grassroots action. The suffering that's going on, the children, the elderly, those who are worried about Social Security and Medicare for good reasons, those who don't have preschool anymore, those who are wondering why the air is so dirty, wondering why there's no future. If we can't turn around climate change, we need to address those fundamental problems, and that's why I'm running for Congress. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Norman. And we're going to hear from Susan Adams.
Thank you, moderators, for hosting us here tonight. Thank you, everybody at home, for being present with us virtually in this studio. I'm Susan Adams, a very enthusiastic candidate for the 2nd Congressional District. What you need to know about me is that I have the deepest roots in this district of any of the candidates. I am descended from a 4th-generational Mendocino ranching family. I have family in Humboldt, and I have very strong roots in this community. I'm a nurse. For 33 years, I have spent my career taking care of people, healing, delivering babies, even emptying a few bedpans along the way. And the approach and the lens that I take to my policy making in the last 9 years as a member of the Marin County Board of Supervisors is the Healthy Planet, Healthy Communities perspective. When you take a healthcare lens and you apply it to any of the issues, whether it's our economy being in distress, whether it's our healthcare system leaving people bankrupt because they happen to become ill, whether it's an educational system that is doing the reverse and leaving many children behind, we need to take a healing approach to all of these issues. Washington and Sacramento have lost touch with our local communities, and the local governments are continuing to try to figure out how to backfill the hits that are coming to us. Recently, the budgets that have been passed in Sacramento have eliminated redevelopment funds, have closed our state parks, have devastated some of our safety net programs and our public school system. And at local government, we are trying to solve those problems, and we're being very effective. I have a long, very strong record of getting the job done. I'm not afraid of fighting the tough fights. I was the swing vote on bringing the very first clean energy program to Marin County to the state of California with a community choice aggregation that hopefully will show that even at local government, we can get off the fossil fuel grid.
Thank you, Susan. And next, we're going to hear from Stacey Lawson.
Thank you, Jason and Connie, for bringing us together, and thank you everyone that's joining in with us tonight. It's such an honor to be part of this dialogue and to be here with my fellow candidates. My name is Stacey Lawson, and I'm running to be the next Congresswoman here in the beautiful and diverse District 2. I should probably start by saying that running for public office was not something I thought would necessarily be part of my life plan. I've actually not come from a political establishment career track. I've actually been focused for the last 20 years on a couple of core passions. The first is a deep and enduring passion for entrepreneurship and economic development. I've helped dozens of entrepreneurs start companies here in the Northern Bay Area economy and create jobs. The second has been a real commitment to helping people's lives through education and social justice. And those are, I think, areas that are very key to solving the problems of our day. What has become clear to me is that as we look at the magnitude and the depth of our problems, that no one organization or even the markets at large are going to be solving our problems. The systemic change we need actually has to start in Washington at a policy level. And right now it seems very clear that Washington is broken, that we're not seeing the kind of policy implementation that we need. And that it will require new leadership to move into our government in order to bring the change that we need. And I, like probably many of you, have been very, very concerned as I look at the state of our economy, as I look at the state of joblessness and unemployment, that for many working and middle class Americans, the American dream is fast fading. And that's why I'm running. I come from very modest roots, from a working and middle class family, from a small town that looks much like the rest of our district here in the Northern Coast. And I'd like to be strong on jobs as well as bringing a defense of our social safety net, of the social contract that has made us strong. I'm the only candidate in the race who has actually created thousands of jobs in our local economy, and I plan to take that to Washington and to preserve the strong social care that we all feel is important for our country.
Thank you, Stacey. Next, we will hear from William Courtney.
Good evening. And thank you, Jason and Connie, for putting this together. And thank you, public, for attempting to sort all this out. If you choose to elect me, we are going to have our hands full. Before this conference is over, in the next 2 hours, 8 species will go extinct. In the next 4 years, between 150 and 500,000 species will go extinct. These are numbers that, according to Science Magazine, could lead up to a 50% extinction, which would put us up in one of the highest mass extinctions. The last mass extinction, the 5th, was the dinosaurs. They only lost 17% of the families. We are currently facing a 50% loss. This last week on the cover of the New York Times, there was an article about the canopies collapsing, that the forests in South America, North America, and Siberia are giving way. The current global warming has been moderated by the forests. They consume a vast quantity of the CO2, and as those ecosystems fall, the CO2 will be rising very quickly. This is an issue that is not just bipartisan, it's global, and it requires very clear and focused attention. An area of my background is in cannabis. Cannabis is able to fix 5 times as much CO2 as an acre of trees, and we need theories in place because as the forests begin to collapse, we're going to have very serious problems. The economy, obviously very serious. We added another $600 billion in debt in August. At that rate, we're going to exceed our revenues within a year. I also believe that term limits are critical. The professional lobbyist politician, I hope that fades away into history, and that we have people representing a district, bringing that to Washington, discussing, giving their input, and then stepping back and letting someone else come up and contribute to the dialogue. I hope you choose to support me in this effort. I believe that I'll be able to make some significant progress.
Thank you, William. Next, we will hear from Tiffany Renee.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason and Connie and North Coast Media and Pixel Corps. And welcome to the public. This is an exciting forum. I come from a family with a long history of public and community service. From an early age, my parents and grandparents instilled the values of hard work and civic engagement. The struggles I have faced in my own life drive me to create better opportunities for others and to have healthier, happier, and more just lives. Washington is broken. Sacramento is broken. Too many politicians are taking hardline positions on revenues versus expenditures without understanding the realities of the average American. I grew up in a very diverse family where I learned to work with people despite our differences. As the first Latina elected to Petaluma City Council, and through my experience serving on numerous boards and committees throughout this region, I have been able to put my experience to work in challenging situations. Having worked in my community, I see people coming together to help one another when they are facing the greatest challenges of their lives. Americans are innovative, creative, and resilient. We need leadership that connects people with that spirit. I have overcome some extraordinary challenges in my life, and I believe that this experience, along with being in government in the greatest economic challenge since the Great Depression, has given me the resilience, wherewithal, and smarts to get America working again. I will continue the work of fostering innovation and job creation, protecting the working class and living wages, preparing our students with a 21st century education, and protecting our water, air, and land. I will continue to be the voice for justice and protecting our quality of life and the rights that we have all struggled for so long.
Thank you, Tiffany. And next we are going to start the actual forum with the questions. And by luck of the draw, Jared gets to answer the first question, which will be asked by Connie.
Yep. This is about jobs. Given the high unemployment in our district, 10% Santa Rosa, do you support the American Jobs Act? Why or why not? And what would you advocate in addition or in place of that?
Thank you for that question, Connie. One of the most important questions that we can be asking right now heading into 2012. I absolutely support President Obama's American Jobs Act. I think it's an important step in the right direction by getting this country refocused on investing and growing our economy, which is a critical strategy for addressing both our deficit and, in the longer term, our very serious national debt, which is a problem and does need to be addressed. We're having a robust debate over how to pay for many of the things in the American Jobs Act, and today the Senate Democrats put a new proposal on the table. I'm open to many creative strategies that help close corporate tax loopholes, require everyone to pay their fair share. We can find a way to do this, but we have to get government back in a leadership role to stimulate the economy. The head of the Federal Reserve yesterday warned us that this recovery is teetering on the brink of stalling and heading into a double dip. So time is truly of the essence. I would like to see less emphasis in response to the second part of your question, Connie, on tax cuts. In this program, I'd like to see a greater emphasis on things like loan guarantees, which can provide money very quickly to address a critical problem in our economy, which is the banks still aren't lending. The government can play an important role in getting that rolling, which will in turn let small businesses do what they do best, and that's create jobs.
Thank you. And Norman Solomon, the same question. High unemployment rate in our district. Do you support the American Jobs Act? And what else might you do?
Yeah. Well, I certainly do support that act that should be passed. And at the same time, I think we need to recognize that we got to examine why there's not the liquidity, why the banks are not lending. As we just heard, that's a big problem. Homeowners have their homes underwater. There's way, way too many foreclosures going on. Banks are not loaning to small businesses. Well, 3 years ago, in the early fall of 2008, there was the push to bail out the Wall Street banks. And as I said publicly at the time with a piece in the Marin IJ, during the week that Congress was debating, that this was a giveaway to Wall Street without any sort of indication that it would result in what the bankers call liquidity, the loans to small businesses, the loans to help homeowners keep their homes. And unfortunately, we've had this pattern that I would represent a real change to. The pattern is that Democrats just sort of go along with the head of the party, and I'm a very loyal Democrat. I was elected as an Obama delegate from the North Bay. As John F. Kennedy said, though, sometimes party loyalty asks too much when you see that the proposals are inadequate. And we've been struggling with inadequate proposals where there's aid to the banks but no requirements. You know, if a woman goes to feed her family to the food stamp office, there's a requirement from that woman to agree to A, B, C, D and promise not to do H, G, F, whatever. But at the same time, we've had this pattern of giving way to the banks without requiring that the banks loan to small businesses, loan to the homeowners, make it feasible for people to keep their homes when they're in jeopardy. So we need to invest a lot more in jobs, and we need to stop giving away to Wall Street, and we've got to insist that the federal government take the responsibility to create jobs. And that means a vigorous jobs program much larger than the one that's in the current stimulus package.
Thank you very much. Susan Adams, do you support the American Jobs Act? Why or why not? And what in addition would you do?
Yes, thank you. I think the proposals that have been put forth by the president are good and sound. It's not another stimulus package that I think made a lot of people in the country upset. It includes issues like giving tax credits for corporations or businesses that hire veterans that are coming home, or for people that have been on the unemployment roll for 6 months. It allows an opportunity to reinvest back into our failing infrastructure in this country. We had a big economic surge at one point in our country when we invested into our highways and our bridges and our building our schools, and those structures are failing now. Corporate jobs aren't the only jobs. Public jobs are good jobs too, and they pay good wages, and public employees are taxpayers. So I think we need to be able to invest in a whole range of jobs that will help people get back on their feet again, that will help them preserve their houses, that will keep them from being bankrupt if they find themselves ill from some kind of a catastrophic condition. And as we move forward, we need to find the ways to help the banks give back to the taxpayers for the bailout by reinvesting back into those jobs again. I believe that everybody needs to pay their fair share share. Elizabeth Warren just very eloquently demonstrated that when you are even a private corporation, you're using public infrastructure to make your money, and that we all need to share in the responsibility of making this country great again. We shouldn't be in a race to the bottom. We should definitely be looking at how do we ensure that this country can get back on its feet again. Jobs, jobs, jobs. That's the number one issue that I'm hearing when I'm going up and down this beautiful coast.
Thank you, Susan. And Stacey Lawson, do you support the American Jobs Act? Why or why not? And what else would you do to help build jobs?
Thank you, Connie. So I think the American Jobs Act is a good first step, but we need to go much further. If you look at our district, we have in Marin County 8.3% unemployment. Going up the coast, it marches up all the way to 17+% up in Trinity County. So we are certainly, California has been very hard hit, and our counties in particular in the North Coast have been hard hit. So what I would say about the Jobs Act, one is half of the stimulus, about $240 million of the $447 million, is in tax cuts. I think that is good, but we're seeing that corporations are actually sitting on very large piles of cash. What I'd like to see is more investment in actual job creation. So in terms of investment in infrastructure, I think that we should actually go further, that we have roads, bridges, ports, airports, schools, and other public facilities that actually we need to invest in, and that creates jobs, that we should go further there. Second, I think that small business is the engine of innovation, and it's the engine of our economy, and it's very important that we're putting in place specific programs for small business. Those include access to credit that they have not had. It includes stimulating ecosystems to support small business communities within our local areas. So I think every county should have an incubator, and we have models like those that we've developed at the Center for Entrepreneurship and Technology at Berkeley, which I co-founded, where we look at how to stimulate funding, how to create ecosystems, models that we can stamp out across our North Coast district in order to support small business in creating new jobs and in Made in America. And then the third, I think we actually need to support new sectors that have promise. Sectors like clean economy and green technology, where we can both be creating a sustainable future and creating jobs in the meantime. And I think as we look to these incubation centers or innovation centers, that we can actually identify those industries with which additional loan guarantees or credit programs can help us drive forward new industries and many more jobs.
Thank you, Stacey. William Courtney, do you support the American Jobs Act? Why or why not? And what, in addition, would you do to create jobs?
I would have to agree that basically it's moving in the right direction, but specifically when we do recovery and investment, as opposed to, there's been a lot of support on building the roads, and you bring in some large company and you lay down a bunch of concrete, and it certainly feels nice to drive on a nice highway. In Mendocino, the West Company is a business that works with micro loans and supports businesses of 5 employees or less. And when you put a very small amount of money in the hands of a small group that's trying to survive, you get some fairly dramatic results that leads to long-term results. If we make major construction and consume vast quantities of money, those are not going to generate jobs over the long haul. So I think we need to focus in the Small Business Administration and in the micro business and put our recovery money into the people, because we need to create new jobs. We're in a global economy. I've been to China several times. I've seen people work very hard for very little money. And if we're going to compete in this same globe, we're going to have to come up with ways to support each other, create new job avenues that we haven't had before. And when people are desperate enough and they have an opportunity, and that's where the microloan is very important, because it gives a small group of people a chance to nurture an idea. And I think that's where the innovation of Americans can get ourselves back on our feet and back employed. But they need access to that capital, without which it's a bunch of theory that goes nowhere.
Thank you very much. And Tiffany Renee, do you support the American Jobs Act? Yes or no? And what else might you do to create jobs here?
Thank you. It's unfortunate that the Jobs Act doesn't seem to be going very far at this time, and it's probably too little in terms of what has been proposed. Certainly it needs to be larger than it is with less tax cuts. One of the things that we could do to improve a jobs bill in the future would be to address the loopholes in the Small Business Administration that allow small businesses to contract with the federal government. By closing those loopholes and keeping those contracts with smaller businesses, we can infuse dollars into the local economy more quickly. Additionally, if we're going to address jobs, we have to address our future workforce, and that includes focusing on science, technology, engineering, and math education, as well as other types of workforce training at the high school level to keep students engaged and learning and prepared for the workforce that we will need in the future if we're going to stay competitive with the rest of the world. We need to be able to focus on keeping our manufacturing at home, and that takes skilled workers, and it provides excellent jobs at quality living wages. We need infrastructure. Our roads are crumbling, our bridges are becoming dangerously unsafe, and so that is an excellent place to start with a jobs bill, because it can provide capital very quickly into local economies. We have got to focus on our high dropout rates. As someone who left school at 16, I understand the challenges that our young people are facing right now. I was a teen mom, and I know what we need in order to stay in school, and that's quality education that will keep our students engaged. And so focusing on education as a piece of the jobs bill will be critical.
Thank you. And Daniel Roberts, do you support the American Jobs Act? Why or why not? And what else might you suggest to grow jobs in District 2?
The answer is no. This is not going to be a unanimous vote tonight. I don't, in my opinion, I've spent a lot of time back there. The administration and the Treasury don't have a clue about addressing the unemployment rate, or it wouldn't be 9.1 or 9% today. It would be much better. So that says that this kind of unemployment level is difficult to fix. Otherwise, there would be other approaches which haven't worked. They've tried the stimulus; it didn't work. With my voice back there and my experience in quasi-government for years, that I can perhaps provide some ideas. I'll give you some specifics about it. So you have to cut, now in order to, we have a, so to speak, a spending problem, not a taxing problem. So you need to make our corporations more competitive in a world environment. We're losing that battle now. So with all these trade deals we've made with Canada, Mexico, and now other countries, Korea, etc., the foreigners do have a competitive advantage on the cost of work. So we're losing jobs over there. So that's something you have to deal with. So you have to make the corporations competitive in a world environment, cut corporate tax. You have to accelerate write-offs. The Super Committee is looking at these issues now. This is not something I invented. You can follow it on your C-SPAN. So accelerate the appreciation, write-offs. So that's a way of recovering your capital sooner than later. So these are measures that I would bring forward and say that government never has created jobs. It didn't work in the 30s. It's not going to work now. If we're not careful, we could be in Japan with 10 years of stagnation. I don't want that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Well, we will go to the next question, which is on health care. And this question is going to go to Jared. And the question is, our aging population requires more care than any previous generation. Do you support single-payer health care? If so, how would you implement it? If not, what other program would you advocate?
Do I support single-payer? Yes. I've actually not only been on record supporting it, but each of the past 5 years I've co-authored the legislation for single-payer universal health care coverage here in California. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to pass it here. The politics of passing it here, and certainly at the national level, are challenging. So for now, I think the best thing we can do is work to defend the Affordable Care Act. which did pass a couple of years ago. And while it doesn't go nearly as far as I would like to see in healthcare reform, it does one very important thing. It gets 95% of the American people under the umbrella of insurance coverage for the first time, which is an important step towards beginning to bend the cost curve on skyrocketing health insurance costs. There's one more thing we need to do, though. Now that we're getting everyone under coverage, we have to make sure the insurance companies can't arbitrarily raise rates too highly. And I am jointly authoring the most important legislation in years this year to do just that, to require rate regulation of insurance companies in health insurance. We're going to keep working on that one.
Well done, Jared, in your answer, and I apologize for not letting everybody know that the answers are actually supposed to be 1 minute. There was a goof with the timer for the first question, which is why everyone got 2 minutes. Going forward, it'll be 1 minute response. I appreciate your sportsmanship on understanding that. So next we'll go to Norman Solomon, the same question. Our aging population requires more care than any previous generation. Do you support single-payer health care? If so, how would you implement it? If not, what other program would you advocate?
Yeah, I not only strongly support single-payer health care, but I've been co-chair of one of the main groups nationally who've been working on it politically, the Healthcare Not Warfare campaign, which is co-chaired along with myself by John Conyers, who's the prime sponsor of H.R. 676 in Congress to get national single-payer health care. And our third co-chair is Donna Smith, who people saw in Michael Moore's film Sicko, from the California Nurses Association. The gist, though, is it's not enough to say you're for single-payer health care. You got to be willing to fight for it. And the fact is, it got through the legislature twice in California, vetoed by the Republican governor. Then, when we had a Democratic governor, it was kept off the floor by the Democratic Party leadership. And I believe that we, as advocates for guaranteed health care for all, need to be ready, willing, able to speak out, including challenging our party leadership to say, when we have the majority, let's get it done. Healthcare is a human right. We can't just watch this fall apart. There's another reality. Medicare, Medicaid funding is under the axe, and we've got to be willing and able to fight in Washington to preserve them.
Thank you, Norman. And the same question for Susan Adams.
Thank you. Well, we already have a single-payer system. It's called Medicare, but you have to be 65 years old in order to access it. And most seniors that are 65 or older like their Medicare. In fact, when there are ever any thoughts or cuts being proposed, the seniors rise up and say, don't touch our Medicare. I teach a health policy class for graduate students at Dominican, and we do a comparative analysis that demonstrates that the amount of money that we spend every year for our healthcare system, which doesn't cover almost 50 million people, is 2 to 3 times more expensive than other countries where they live 4 to 5 years longer than we do, and that includes third world countries. I've been a single payer proponent since before any other politician ever even learned what the term was through my 33-year career in nursing, and through the work that I've done with physicians for a national health program and through California Nurses Association.
Thank you, Susan. And Stacy Lawson, the same question.
So my grandmother was a nurse, and my mother is involved in public health. She actually is the executive administrator of the public health officers for the state of California. So healthcare is something that's very near and dear to my heart and in our family. I absolutely support single payer. I think the Affordable Care Act has been a step in the right direction, that it reduces some of the abuses of the insurance companies. It gets more people under coverage. We have now 35 million more Americans who have access to insurance and care than we did before, which I think is fantastic. I was disappointed to see the public option not part of that package, as it would have allowed 12 million more low-income Americans have access to care, and I think that single payer is absolutely the step we need to take for the next phase of our embracing a system that works for all and includes all Americans.
Thank you, Stacy. And William, shall I repeat the question?
Please.
Okay. Our aging population requires more care than any previous generation. Do you support single-payer health care? If so, how would you implement it? If not, what other program would you advocate?
The concept is basically very sound, but as the baby boomers move forward, the bulge of users grows large, and those to support it, it gets smaller. We're looking at a multi-trillion shortfall in Social Security and in pension funds not being funded without revenue streams. So there's a shortage of revenues that's going to affect a lot of these projects. The insurance companies may not really want this all consolidated and their margins taken out, and they're an extremely powerful group that has a lot of swing. I mean, we tossed them a couple $1 trillion when they were too large to fail. So there's a couple of impediments that are there in the way, but one of the big ones is unless we get the military to kind of move some of the funding over into the domestic side, with 69% of our gross domestic product going just to service the debt, there is not money left over for a lot of these projects. So where's the money going to come from for expanding, and are the insurance companies going to allow a consolidation and a reduction in their income?
Thank you, William. And Tiffany Renee, the same question.
Thank you. I do support single-payer health care. As a City Council member, one of the challenges that we continue to face are the rising healthcare costs in our community. It's something that I see on other regional boards as well. The costs of healthcare are crippling our ability to provide public services. And so in order to be able to provide public services at the local level, we need to see a single-payer healthcare system for our public employees. I believe it would really address our local issues around funding problems. And one of the ways to do that, because we didn't get it in this first time, a next round, along with defending the Health Care Act, would be to lower the Medicare eligibility age and provide that system for all Americans. In terms of funding, we've got to bring our troops home, and that's one way that we can help continue to reinvest in America.
Thank you, Tiffany. And now we'd like to hear from Dan Roberts. Shall I repeat the question?
No, I got it. Thank you very much. And I think I have, William and I might agree that this Health Act, Obamacare, if you will, is problematic. And you've mentioned the reasons, and I think I agree with most of it. It can't be paid for. At least I don't see it. And I think the individual mandate's probably going to be declared unconstitutional. We'll know about that. I think they're going to take the case in March of next year for the Supreme Court. But what can we do in lieu of that? We should have done about 3 things I can think of. Number one, these are not new thoughts. These have been out there. But we lacked consensus when we moved this bill through, and that is absolutely wrong. That's no way to run a democracy. You've got to deal with consensus. Both sides have to agree. Tort reform would be one. Coverage should be portable, and there should be an individual ability to buy insurance and get the tax write-off, just like the corporations get the write-off now. That came out of post-World War II. Unions pushed for it. They got it. But it should be on the individual. So you break between the work and the insurance. You're making that break possibly. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. William's name was mentioned. Did you want to rebut or comment on that? Okay.
Next question is on education, and this time we'll begin with Norman Solomon. California ranks 47th in spending of the 50 states. How would you bring home funding for public schools? What's your opinion of school voucher programs?
Yeah, well, the decimation of the public schools in California is one of the tragic stories of the last decades. I'm opposed to vouchers. I'm opposed to the willy-nilly promotion of charter schools, which is privatization by any other name. I think the so-called No Child Left Behind and also now the Race to the Top are reinforcements of the notion that we just teach to the test and regiment, while there are so many unfunded mandates involved. So really a huge problem is that the federal government needs to step up to the plate. The federal government is the only government that can deficit spend. If we hadn't had deficit spending, we could have never had a New Deal. In these counties of our district, in the cities, in the state of California, the government cannot deficit spend. The federal government can and must to provide the kind of funding that is needed to expand the federal responsibility so that every child in our district and the country has what is a human right, and that is full access to quality education.
Thank you very much. Susan Adams, how would you bring home funding for public schools, and what's your opinion of the voucher program idea?
Well, I'm not a big fan of the voucher program. And I think, as I stated earlier, that we're in a situation now where we have been racing to the bottom in terms of our educational system. We should be investing in early preschool education all the way up through college, a public education system that levels the playing field for anybody that wants to work hard enough to have access and to be able to enhance the qualities and the options in their lives. And without a quality education, we become non-competitive in a global market. Other countries are leaping ahead of us in terms of the science, the tech, as was stated in an earlier comment. But we also need to make sure that our teachers don't have handcuffs on them in how they teach. We are not allowing our children to learn how to use their critical thinking brains or their creative brains. We are teaching our children now how to take a test and answer a question either right or wrong. And as we all know, there are very few black and white right or wrongs.
Thank you, Susan. Stacy, how would you bring home funding for public schools, and what's your opinion of the voucher program?
So as an educator myself, I actually think it's very, very critical that we reestablish strength in our education system here in California. And one of the key jobs of a congresswoman in this district is to actually get access to public funding, or excuse me, to federal funding to bring home to California. I think that educating our youth is one of the most important and very intricately interwoven issues around the economy, economic recovery, and jobs. In that when I talk to employers in our district, I hear constantly that what they need is youth who can reinvent the job as the economy requires. And in order for us to be leaders in the future innovation economy, that our youth need to be prepared with that versatility that they're not now. So I'm not a big fan of vouchers, but I do think that having models like charter schools where they're the incubation environment or the innovation environment, and then we bring the best of that learning process into our public schools is the right dialogue to be having, that both are critical, and that it's a model that we can use in order to make sure that our education system is sound and that the funding that we receive can be put to use properly.
Thank you, Stacy. William, how would you bring home funding for public schools, and what is your opinion of the voucher program?
Yeah, it seems like the voucher program is a way to take care of your own, or to take some money and do something with it more creatively, which some people could take advantage of. But I think in general, if we're trying to raise the standards for everyone, the schools have to come along with us. It's horrifying. I used to spend a large portion of my childhood in libraries. Libraries are open a couple days a week if you're lucky. All the programs at school are being cut off, and the electives, the evening classes, the things that were considered non-essential. And so as the schools contract, the kids that are going through them have so much less of an opportunity. With the lack of money, the priorities are very, very important. And if we're going to be dumping tons of money into stationing military personnel all over the world in 130 different countries, then the kids at home don't have school. So I don't understand how that process has dealt with, but if we care about our children, we're going to have to pull some of the money out of the military and make it available so that the schools are open, so that they have art classes, so that they can take full advantage of their childhood.
Thank you, William. Tiffany, how would you bring home funding for public schools, and what's your opinion of the voucher program?
I'm not a supporter of the voucher program. However, I do think that charter schools, when carefully watched, can be alternative ways of exploring educational means. The educational system in this country needs our attention, and we've got to be able to keep our youth engaged and involved in the educational process. The cuts that we have seen to our arts programs are devastating to the children themselves. They need that ability to have that creative outlet. It's what helps them stay engaged, and it's what helps them support science, technology, engineering, and math studies. Many research studies have shown that music education is something that can very much support math studies and science studies. So we need to focus on bringing money home for those particular areas, and we need to stop teaching to the test, and that means remodeling our current program around No Child Left Behind.
Thank you, Tiffany. And Dan Roberts, how would you bring home funding for public schools, and your opinion on the voucher program?
Well, let me give you my take on this, and once again, this is not going to be a unanimous vote tonight on this subject, as you might guess. As a constitutional conservative, this education issue is a state issue, not a federal issue. And so what does it make sense really to send the money back to Washington, and then it's called clipped, it gets smaller and comes back to us at less than 100% on the dollar. It makes no sense. It's a state issue, it ought to be dealt here in the state. I met with Mary Jane Burke. She's the superintendent of Marin Public Instruction today for about an hour. She opted out. As a matter of fact, she opted out of the Race to the Top program, right? Why? Because with the federal programs come strings attached, right? And she doesn't want any strings attached, right? That impedes education. As far as the so it's a state issue, not a federal issue. I'd be inclined to zero out, actually, that particular budget. As far as school vouchers, I think competition is important to get the best out of the teachers and the students, so I favor vouchers.
Thank you, Daniel. And Jared Huffman, how would you help correct the situation where we're 47th in spending for education? How would you bring funding home, and your opinion on vouchers?
First of all, I oppose vouchers. On federal funding, I think there's lots of ways where we need the federal government to step up and be part of revitalizing our public school system. Just 3 specific ones, though. Number 1, No Child Left Behind has to be reauthorized. It would have been reauthorized this year, but this Congress can't get its act together on anything, so President Obama is granting waivers this year. I support that as a short-term solution. But the next member of Congress is going to have an opportunity to be part of reauthorizing it. We need to make sure it is fair, funded, and flexible. So funded is a key part of that. And then special education. The IDEA is a great policy to promote support for individuals with disabilities in our education system, but it never was funded at the level that it needs to be. That's a huge priority for me. I'm going to work hard on it. The school nutrition program is another one that needs significantly more money. Lynn Woolsey and others worked hard to finally get a modest increase. We need to keep working on that, though. Lastly, I just want to say last week we announced the endorsement of more than 50 education leaders in this congressional district because I have worked with them on these issues and will continue to do so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jared. And the next question, we'll start with Susan Adams. This is on government spending. Congress is struggling to fund our U.S. government. Where would you cut?
Well, I think there probably would be a lot of agreement around this forum tonight that getting us out of this very expensive war where we're spending $10 billion a month is probably one of the first areas that we should be looking at. And we're going to be dealing with a lot of veterans that are going to be coming home needing our services. The next wave of our homeless are on their way home right now. We need to be reinvesting back into our own education infrastructure and healthcare systems and building our own economy here at home. I think that the other issues are criminal justice. That's another area that we haven't talked about tonight, but our jails are overrun with people that are there because of their mental illness or substance abuse problem. In Marin County, we started a mentally ill offenders program that has diverted 200 mentally ill people into treatment instead of jail, and we've reduced the recidivism by 85%. So I think there's a lot of places where we can cut the waste and invest in early prevention, early detection, and early treatment.
Thank you, Susan. And Stacy.
I agree. There'll probably be consensus on the panel here tonight about reducing military spending. We currently spend 45% of the world's investment in military. And so we immediately need to bring our troops home and to cut the budgets in Iraq and Afghanistan, bring that money to work back here at home. The other part of the conversation, though, that's not part of your question is revenue. And this lopsided conversation about spending versus revenue, I think, is what is broken in Washington right now, that we need to do major tax reform. And there are many fortunate Americans, or at least a few percentage points at the top, that also need to be paying their fair share. So I think we need to see tax reform as it relates to the wealthiest in our country. We need to see also tax reform as it relates to our corporations and making sure that that tax loopholes for companies like oil and gas and others are closed. There is plenty of revenue. In fact, the president's current plan brings $1.5 trillion in revenue from tax reform that can fund many programs in our country.
Thank you, Stacy. And William, the same question. Congress is struggling to fund our U.S. government. Where would you cut?
Military obviously comes to mind as the only one that appears to be having a fairly flush budget. And I don't understand why it's such a sacrosanct area. You look at all the areas that are in free fall, and as I mentioned when I first started out, the environment is in free fall. There's so much to be done to preserve the planet, to preserve the genome, and this spending, huge amounts of our money around the world in military actions is an idea whose time has passed. The fact that we have such a huge deficit, the fact that such a large percentage of our gross domestic product is going to service that debt is an incredibly difficult situation. The fact that that debt is growing so fast is very complex. But if it's not the single focus of Congress, then I'm not certain what our future holds.
Thank you, William. Tiffany, where would you cut?
Certainly, we have got to bring our troops home and cut our military spending. As someone whose family has 3 generations in the military, and my youngest brother is a veteran, I understand that along with cutting military, we have to ensure that our Veterans Administration program remains whole, and that we do focus on ensuring that when we bring our troops home, they are cared for and they can find employment. We need to additionally address the revenue side by taxing the richest in this country and bringing that revenue home where it belongs instead of offshores. And so it is a two-sided coin, revenue and cuts, but the immoral cuts can be made and should be made as soon as possible.
Thank you, Tiffany. Dan Roberts, the same question.
Okay, very good. Yeah, in terms of, let me say 4 things before I answer your question about where the cuts should occur. In our own lives and in government, certainly, it's easy to overspend, but very hard to pay it off. Number one. Number 2, it's clear we need to balance the budget without halting the creation of new currency, inflating our money, which is happening now with the Treasury buying back bonds. The fact is that the yet unborn will have to pay this. I think we've gone down that road with $14.5 trillion in debt, which is absolutely terrible. And I would say finally that tax reform, in terms of tax reform, I lower the rate and broaden the base rather than continue this class warfare. And then finally, you cut military, energy, and education. I think we agree with some of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, and we will give the same question to Jared Huffman.
Well, certainly you have to start at the top. 2 of the biggest things that we can and I think must do are, first, reduce military spending by ending these wars as quickly as possible, but also looking at the entire forward deployed military that we have around the world that is still left over from our Cold War security paradigm. We're beyond that now. We need to focus on our real security interests, and there's a huge peace dividend by doing that. The second thing is we have to look at our tax expenditures for what they really are, and that is spending. So we need to look at everything from the corporate jet issue to the carried interest deduction that allows hedge fund managers to pay a lower capital gains tax rate on their income than anyone here in this room. That's just not fair. It's not right. The Warren Buffett rule is something that I'm happy to look at. The things that we do by way of tax cuts and tax credits and deductions are spending items just as surely as our social programs, and we need to start treating them that way.
Thank you, Jared. I'm getting a lot of questions online right now, and I just want to let the viewers and our studio audience know that we will be addressing those questions at about 7:30 is when we plan to do that. So we'll just want to let everyone know because they're asking about it. Now we're going to go to Norman Solomon to answer the same question.
Yeah, well, certainly we need to cut the subsidies de facto for Wall Street and the very rich. military spending needs to be drastically cut. And the reason that we need to bring troops home from Iraq and Afghanistan is they were sent there in the first place. And my record is clear as the only candidate in this race with any significant foreign policy experience. I went to Iraq 3 times before the invasion. I've been in Afghanistan. When we went to Baghdad, I took former U.S. Senator Jim Abourezk and sitting Senator Nick Rahal. I took Sean Penn there. I took a UN official there, all before the war, having meetings with Tariq Aziz and other top Iraqi officials, trying to find alternatives to war. And one of the real problems with this military expenditure boondoggle that keeps going on is that when the wars are being implemented, there's silence among people in Washington and elsewhere. And I'm very proud that I spoke up against these wars and worked to stop them. In 2009 and 2010, I've worked to stop the escalation of the wars the war in Afghanistan, and I'm still looking for evidence that any of my opponents spoke out against the escalation of the war in Afghanistan during those 2 years under this administration.
Thank you, Norman.
Our next question starts with Susan Adams.
Nope. Stacy, sorry.
Stacy, sorry, we're wrong. We're just learning here. Starts with Stacy. It's about tax policy. Under Eisenhower, a time of great prosperity, our top marginal tax rate was 90%. Currently, it's 35%. Do you believe the top marginal tax rate should be increased? To what percentage? What percentage would you advocate? If not, why not? What would you advocate, if anything, to change our current tax policies?
Great. So as I was mentioning earlier, I think tax reform is critical. It's one of the major revenue buckets that we have not looked at as a country thus far, given the sort of quagmire in Washington. I believe that it's important for our top earners to pay the top marginal tax rate, which is currently not happening. What we see is that our top earners are actually taking certain tax benefits and accessing loopholes in the code that actually don't require them to pay those top brackets. And if they did, our situation would be much better. So the Warren Buffett rule, making sure that our top earners are indeed paying the current rates, making sure that deductions are maxed out at the 28% level, which has been proposed, I think is very important, and making sure that our corporate tax rates also are closing loopholes that exist for oil and gas companies and other types of entities that don't require those, that are sitting on trillions of dollars of cash right now that need to be used for our social programs and maintaining our standard of living and the equity of our social structure in America.
Thank you, Stacy. William, how would, under Eisenhower, you've heard and probably recall, the top marginal tax rate was 90%. It's currently 35%. What do you think it should be? And how would you change our current tax policies?
It would seem like a flat rate would just to eliminate the deductions, the avoidance, the loopholes, the endless runarounds, would allow everyone to participate in proportion to what they can. An enormous amount of energy seems to be spent on tax avoidance, tax minimization, tax transfers, and that's energy that if we don't spend it on dealing with our environment and the loss of species, we've got a full-time job trying to survive, and the whole tax thing needs to be simplified, needs to be equitable, and let's get on with what are we going to do with the money that's left. And one of those things has to be we have to address the environment before it collapses around us.
Thank you, William. Tiffany, tax policy. Under Eisenhower, we saw a marginal tax rate of 90%. It's at 35%. Where do you think it should be? And what changes would you make to our current tax policies?
Thank you. Certainly, we need to end corporate welfare as another means of addressing our tax situation. We do need to raise the rate on the highest earners in this country. Whether or not it's 90%, I doubt we're going to get there. However, it does need to go higher. Additionally, one of the things that we need to address is Social Security and the payment caps, and removing or increasing that payment cap to a much higher rate, so that my generation will continue to see Social Security longevity and well into the future.
Thank you. And Dan Roberts, under Eisenhower, we had a top rate of 90%. It's at 35. Where do you think it should be, and how would you change our current tax policies?
That's great. Thank you for the question. So you've asked mainly, when you refer to Eisenhower, that's an individual rate. But I can also talk about the corporate rate. And the fact is that the dirty little secret is that corporations never pay tax, not a dime. People pay tax. You tax a corporation, you're extracting, you're adding friction to the system, you're extracting from the employers, the employees, employers, or shareholders. That's where it comes from. They pass it on, or they go out of business, right? So let's forget about the idea that we have subsidies to corporations. They really don't pay tax. People pay tax. And the rate should be, I would go to 15% flat tax rate. There's too much time for mischief with the current system we have. I think everybody understands that. If you try to do your own taxes, you'll learn that. I gave up years ago doing my own. Lower the rates, broaden the base. I mentioned that earlier. Well, I think we all should participate. I think every American should have an oar in the water in this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And Jared, there was at one time a 90% tax rate. It's 35. Where do you think it should be, and how would you change our current tax policies?
Well, President Eisenhower was in power at a time when our country paid for the wars that it was part of. We actually raised taxes. Republicans, Democrats came together and understood that that's what you need to do. But in the last decade, we've done something we've never done in our history, and that is we started a couple of wars, and instead of actually raising taxes to pay for them, we did tax cuts at the same time. A bad idea, and a big part of why we are in this mess right now. So how to get out of it? I know nobody wants to pay more taxes right now. These are tough times. I don't want to raise everyone's taxes, but certainly some of the things on the table now with the highest income earners seem fair to me. The Senate Democrats' proposal of a 5% surcharge on income over $1 million seems fair to me. Allowing those brackets to revert to what they were during the Clinton years when people didn't complain about paying too much taxes also seems fair to me. But we are at a 50-year low in our total taxation in this country. And while we do have to take our deficit and our debt seriously, controlling spending has to be part of that. Getting our revenue and tax policy back in shape has to be an important part of it as well.
Thank you very much. And Norman Solomon, under Eisenhower, we saw a 90% tax rate. It's at 35. Where do you think it should be, and how should we change our policies?
Yeah, well, it clearly needs to be a lot higher, but we need to realize that even if we get partway towards the Eisenhower era rate for the very wealthy, there's also the issue of loopholes of offshoring, the tax liability, and so forth. And those huge tax dodges for the very wealthy and the corporations, those holes need to be plugged as well. Again, as co-chair of the Healthcare Not Warfare campaign, I've worked with John Conyers, has a bill out now in Congress calling for two vital aspects of change in the same legislation. One is to commit this country to full employment, and the other is to fund full employment through federal jobs programs with a 0.25% transaction tax on Wall Street, which, according to the Center for Economic and Policy Research, will raise upwards of $100 billion with a B dollars a year. Some are now saying $150 billion a year to use the money, the revenue, to create jobs in an adequate federal jobs program, which you have not had really for many decades.
Thank you, Norman. Susan, there was once a 90% tax rate. We have a 35% tax rate. What do you think is fair, and how do we need to change, or do we need to change our current tax policies?
Well, when you have one of the richest guys in the world, Warren Buffett, saying, "Tax me, please, because I'm not paying my fair share," I want to help him. I want to say, sure, let's help you out there, because he realizes that the middle class is being squeezed and they are paying a higher percentage of their incomes than what he is paying. It was mentioned earlier that we launched a war at the same time cutting taxes. Bush cut the taxes pretty significantly. I'm saying let's start by going back to the Reagan tax cuts. The Republicans loved that when that happened. And that would still at least be a start in helping to get the ball rolling and returning some revenue back. Governor Jerry Brown, now second time around, when he ran for president, actually proposed a flat tax where everybody pays their fair share. I like the concept of the oar in the water. I think if we all pull together in the same direction, we're going to get our economy back on its feet again, and we'll all feel a sense of responsibility and pride in what we're able to deliver.
Thank you, Susan. Next question goes to Jason.
Okay, and we're going to start this one with William. This is a question on energy policy. The question is, according to the Nuclear Energy Institute, about 20% of electricity in the U.S. is generated by nuclear power. In the wake of the Fukushima disaster, Germany has pledged to shut down all their nuclear power plants by 2022. Would you make a similar pledge for the U.S.? If yes, what would you do to make up the 20% loss in energy without increasing emissions?
I definitely would make a similar pledge. I've spent a good part of my last 20 years studying the movement of the tides, and particularly at the bottom of the ocean. And a favorite hobby is to overweight, sit on the bottom, and watch how the moon affects the Earth. There's enough energy that comes up against this district to provide at least California, if not Western United States, with zero CO2 energy. It's subsurface, it's not exposed to surge, a huge resource, and if that industry could be finalized and the designs in Europe are fairly sophisticated and implemented, it would provide not only a technology locally with jobs in the installation and maintenance, and then the distribution through California, but it would create a technology that we could export to South America, other countries around the world that are currently weighing the coal, nuclear power, petroleum fuel. We have got to stop the CO2. This just is not an option. I mean, when the canopies of the trees come down, it's going to get really crazy, and that's what's happening at this point.
Thank you, William. And the same question for Tiffany. According to the Nuclear Energy Institute, about 20% of our electricity in the U.S. is generated by nuclear power. In the wake of the Fukushima disaster, Germany has pledged to shut down all their power plants by 2022. Would you make a similar pledge for the U.S.? And if yes, what would you do to make up the 20% loss in energy without increasing emissions?
Thank you. I grew up in Sacramento where we had Rancho Seco, and I was relieved when it was finally shut down. It was something that my family was strongly opposing. And so definitely we need to look at shutting down our nuclear energy production. I'm not sure if we could do it by that time period, but it's certainly something that has to be looked at. I hope it's not something that California has to look at through a natural disaster at any time in the near future. We have the capability and we have the intellect to get to that point. We will need to fund the education and the knowledge base in order to achieve that. If we don't do that, we're not going to get there. And so again, I have to say we've got to fund education for the future's workforce. Science, technology, engineering, and math are the keys to our future, and as well as the key to our energy independence. We've got a lot of ability to get there, and if we educate ourselves and apply that innovation, we can achieve it. But it's going to take a little bit of time, and we've already begun that here in the North Coast, so I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Tiffany. Same question to Daniel.
Yes, of course. You're asking about possibly shutting down 20% of our electric power that's produced through nuclear power. Well, I'm going to rephrase the question. I'll answer it this way. The issue is not that we should close nuclear power. We actually should start to license more plants, in my opinion, because it's the cleanest, safest, most productive energy. The real issue is an energy issue. Not nuclear, but it's oil, gas, wind, solar, etc. That's the issue. We've got to get out of the Mideast. We've got to become independent. And how do we do that? We've got to allow more drilling. Number one, where we can drill safely, and we've got to move more, in my opinion, more to natural gas, replacing some of the coal-fired plants. It's a cleaner source of energy. So that would be my feeling if I went back to Washington. That would be my stance. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And the same question to Jared Huffman.
Jason. I oppose nuclear energy, always have. And as chair of the Legislative Environmental Caucus, I have actually had a chance to take action because you're right, Germany has set the standard. They've shown leadership in calling for the phasing out of their nuclear power plants within a decade. I spearheaded a legislative sign-on letter to President Obama calling on him to put the United States on exactly that same path, which I think is the right thing to do. How are we going to replace that power? Well, the good news is the things we have to do there are really good for our economy. It starts with efficiency. If we can max out our potential for building efficiency and retrofits and getting rid of old energy guzzling appliances and light bulbs and replacing them with modern devices, we have the opportunity to create 900,000 jobs and to save over $700 billion in energy costs to ratepayers in the United States. So this is good for us. It's the right thing to do environmentally. It's the right thing to do for so many reasons, and that's my position.
Thank you, Jared. Norman, the same question.
Yeah, there's a reason Dr. Helen Caldicott, one of the leading authorities on nuclear power, has endorsed me for Congress, and that's because more than 3 decades I've been working against nuclear power. I understand through my research and writing, including of the book Killing Our Own, that we've been lied to by federal agencies decade after decade, including the Atomic Energy Commission and the successor agencies, Department of Energy and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. A difference between Jared and I is that I've been calling for immediate permanent closure of both of California's nuclear power plants, not saying we're going to wait for federal agencies to tell us whether those nuclear plants pose an acceptable risk. I understand they've been lying to us for decades about the risks of nuclear energy. So I think that is a clear choice that people have in terms of, will we shut down these nuclear power plants or will we kick the radioactive can down the road?
Thank you, Norman.
If I might
You want to respond to that?
just very, very quickly, Jason. So, I mean, you can call for immediate closure of the power plants. That's one tactic. I've taken a different one. Long before Fukushima, I started asking the hard questions about the seismic risk, about the other risks that are posed by the 2 nuclear power plants in California. Not calling for industry studies, calling for independent science so that we can get the information that if it shows that we've got a risk like Fukushima, we can move very quickly. But realistically, the right thing to do is to have a responsible, aggressive phase out of nuclear power following the gold standard, what Germany has called for. That's been my position.
You know, federal studies are not independent. Federal studies are run by agencies that have been promoting nuclear power for decades. And I worked to oppose nuclear power not just before Fukushima, but before 3 Mile Island. I spent a month in jail after nonviolent civil disobedience with many others I worked with against nuclear power in 1977 and 1978. So the question is, do we wait until there's another disaster in another part of the world, maybe at Diablo Canyon in Central California? Do we mortgage the future of the next many generations who we know, no matter what else happens, will be stuck with vast quantities of nuclear waste? These are the choices that leadership has to provide some answers to.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt a little bit. Are you okay? Do we need to go back and forth, or we can?
It needs to end at some point.
Okay, so we're going to go forward with the next question, actually the same question to Susan Adams. Thanks.
Thank you. The energy issue is not only a climate change issue, it's a national security issue, and getting off of the fossil fuel grid and getting out of the nuclear power threat. And as we saw what happened in Fukushima, I mean, we're not seeing the news reports anymore. They're still dealing with radioactive fallout. I spoke with somebody whose family is there. So what we've done in Marin County, though, and this is the good news, we became the first community choice aggregator for a clean energy authority in our county. And without building any nuclear plants whatsoever, we are going to be able to provide completely clean, renewable energy for our communities and get off of the fossil fuel grid over the next 10 to 20 years. We do it through methane capture in our landfills, through putting more solar on our roofs and letting people actually sell their extra energy back to the grid, by looking at strategic wind energy programs and some small hydro. So we can do this. It will create jobs and it will be good for the health of the planet.
Thank you, Susan. Stacy.
So I'm a proponent of safe reasonable phase out of nuclear, and I believe we should not be building new nuclear. I also think there's a practical issue here, which is we are highly dependent on fossil fuels. We have an addiction to foreign oil, and we have a massive climate change issue. So we need to be investing in alternative, clean, renewable energy sources immediately. And it's not only an economic imperative, it's not only an environmental imperative, but it is a national security imperative. And it's one where I think if we do this investment smartly, we can actually create a large number of new jobs. So California right now is one of the leaders in clean energy job creation and the clean tech sector. We have about 318,000 clean energy jobs in our state right now, and that's still only 2% of our workforce. So I think this question also goes back to the question of job creation and economic stimulus, that if we're investing in clean energy, that we're actually creating new opportunities to put people back to work here in California, which I think is very critical.
Thank you, Stacy. How is everybody doing? This would be the time where we might take a little bit of a break. Would everybody like to take a few minutes? And then when we come back, we'll be taking all of the questions and looking at those that have been sent to us via the online form. So let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll have some questions from the audience. Thank you so much. Great, we're back. Well, we've been getting a lot of questions online, and if you want your question to rise to the top, the way to do that is you want to vote on it. So feel free, online viewers, to rate these questions and push the question of most importance to you up to the top. And with that said, we're going to start with the top question right now, which is about fundraising. And this is posted by Sandra Florin. Will everyone pledge not to take any PAC money whatsoever? And we're going to go ahead and start with, what order were we in? Tiffany Renee.
I can't say I'm going to vow not to take any PAC money. Endorsements are, I think, a critical process of an election, and a way for groups of people to weigh in on this democratic process. So if there are endorsements, they're typically done through PACs, and if I do receive endorsements such as that, I would probably accept those. I'm not interested in corporate PAC money, and so I am another candidate that has not taken any corporate PAC money and won't.
Thank you, Tiffany. And same question for you, Dan.
Yes, well, I really haven't crossed that threshold yet, having just financed my own campaign. But going forward, the way I see it, I value the freedom of speech. And in saying that, we know that the Supreme Court has recognized corporate contributions through PACs as speech, right? Almost unlimited, I think, contributions, right? So I recognize that's a form of speech. On the other hand, in my campaign, I think that when we go out to the grassroots and get more donors, that's breadth of support, and that is important as well. So I will take both kinds. I will take the PAC money and the individual money, because it's going to take a lot of money to do this. I think Lynn spent $850,000, right? Well, I don't have that much personally. Well, I don't have that much personally, so I'm not going to go that way. So I'll need help, and I look for support, as we say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jared, same question.
I'll tell you a little bit about my fundraising in this campaign. First, I am humbled to have really broad support thus far in the campaign, and it comes over 90% from individuals. Of those, the vast majority either live in this district or immediately adjacent to it. So I think that's a healthy thing. I am raising overwhelmingly from the people that we are all seeking to represent. Less than 5% of my fundraising comes from political action committees, and of those there is a mix of environmental groups, labor, and some business. It's about the same mix of groups that gave to Lynn Woolsey when she's been in office the last couple of decades. But here's my pledge on money. I'm not going to be beholden to anyone who contributes to my campaign. I don't care who they are or what they are or where they're from. And in my case, you actually have a record, because I've been tested in the job of being a legislator. So for the last 5 years, I've got an extensive voting record. You know what I've stood up for? Consumers, the environment, and the public every time.
Thank you, Jared. And the same question for Norman.
Yeah, I don't think corporations are in the business of philanthropy. Corporations are not giving money to politicians office holders and political aspirants just out of the goodness of their corporate heart. I guess corporations have a heart, or whatever the metaphor would be. So not being into philanthropy, they're doing it for a reason, because they know it's helpful to advance the agenda of Wall Street and corporations. I'm very proud that our campaign has announced that we have not taken a single penny of corporate PAC money. And I'm also proud that we've been able to, while swearing off and never having taken a dime of corporate PAC money, we've been able to raise more than $200,000. And it's come from more than 1,950 different individuals. Given the rotten way in which our political system is drowning in big money, that's the healthiest ecology of a grassroots campaign that I can think of. The long-term solution is to have campaigns running that are connected to people in the local communities.
Thank you, Norman. Susan Adams, the same question.
Thank you. I think it'll be up to the voters to determine what the meaning is of whether or not somebody is taking PAC money and which kind of PAC money is coming. I currently, the only PAC money that I've received has been from a law enforcement group who supports the work that I've done with mentally ill offenders and therapeutic justice. I think that what the bigger issue is the need for campaign finance reform. And we need to take a look at how we're allocating corporations the designation as personhood. I think individual human beings are people, not corporations. And so to give all the same rights and responsibilities and constitutional protection to a corporate entity that you do to an individual human, I think needs to be addressed in our political system. And until we have very serious campaign finance reform, it's very difficult to raise enough money to be able to get the messages out to a community as large as our 2nd Congressional District so that the people in this community know who we are and what our message is.
Thank you, Susan. Same question for Stacy.
So to date, 100% of our campaign monies have come from individuals. And we actually just announced this morning that for the first 60 days of our campaign, we've raised over $238,000, which I think is a fantastic testament to voters interested in seeing alternative candidates that have not come from the political establishment, that represent a visionary new leadership with innovation and job creation at the forefront to come into this race and be part of this dialogue and to represent this district in Congress. I do agree wholeheartedly with the need for campaign finance reform. That what has been shocking to me, although I understood it as a citizen, as a candidate, it's quite unfortunate that we spend so much of our time fundraising as opposed to dealing with the issues and the policy and the topics that are going to be required in Washington. So I would love to see campaign finance reform actually alleviate that sort of burden, if you will, from campaigners and allow us to be doing the work at hand that needs to be the case, which is solving our problems in Washington.
Thank you, Stacy. And the same question for William.
Yeah, I think the concept of a corporation is a failed concept. It's not been around for a millennium. It's a way for people to consolidate greed and reduce the risk to the minimum amount. So the idea that without a child development, I mean, it doesn't take a psychiatrist to know that a corporation is not a person, and to give them First Amendment protection for freedom of speech it's bizarre. It's the same 5-4 group that said Gore really shouldn't be president. I mean, where's the oversight on that group that allows them to make decisions? But the idea that a corporation is an individual and has those rights, I'm so opposed to it that I don't think I'm going to have to worry about rejecting it. And no one's offered it, and I'm pretty certain that they're not, given my current feelings about the whole subject.
Thank you, William. And now we're going to take a question from the studio audience. Connie?
Okay. Do you support or oppose the 1,700-mile-long Trans-Canada pipeline to run from Western Canada to Texas? Why or why not? And does that go to Daniel next?
Yes.
Yeah,
Hi.
thank you. Question has been posed. I suppose it's multifaceted again, so it'd be simple to say to you yes or no on the pipeline. But really, it's a heavy environmental issue with what fuels are going to be pumped through there. It's going to, I mean, it could be liquid tar sands. I mean, it could be oil, gas. I don't know what's going to come through there. And secondly, then you have it creates a footprint, and how far is it going to go, right? So it's a big issue. In my own mind, I've looked at it, I've studied, I enjoy studying these public policy issues, and it hasn't come to the point where we've had to make a decision on it yet, I don't think. So the jury's still out. In my case, the jury is still out on whether I would oppose it or vote for it.
Thank you, Daniel. Jared, do you support or oppose the pipeline proposed from Canada through to Mexico, through to Texas? Why or why not?
Right. I oppose that pipeline. Whether it is a huge pipeline to bring in oil from the tar sands of Alberta, or whether it is new drilling in the Arctic refuge, or new ways to push further and further into our ocean ecosystem and try to find reserves of oil there, I think we're missing what we ought to be doing. What we ought to be doing is taking all of the subsidies that are fueling this quest for fossil fuels and putting them into a Manhattan Project-like investment for new clean energy. It's the right thing to do for our environment, it's the right thing to do for job creation, long-term good jobs, and also the right thing to do for national security.
Norman, do you support or oppose the long pipeline from Canada to Texas? Why or why not?
I'm strongly opposed to that pipeline, and for that matter to the tar sands development in Canada in the first place. It's just one of the very dirtiest and unspeakably unjustifiable ways to try to extract oil from the earth. I announced several weeks ago at our campaign rally, we had 300 people over at the Mystic Theater in Petaluma, our campaign's solidarity with those who were in front of the White House doing nonviolent civil disobedience in opposition to this planned pipeline through so much of the United States. And I think it goes to the question of what kind of voice we in this district want to have in Washington. Lynn Woolsey has been willing to step up to the plate. Democrat or Republican in the White House hasn't mattered to her. When it's a matter of principle, protecting the environment, fighting for solar and wind, opposing wars, she's been willing to speak up and speak out. That's the kind of congressperson that I intend to be. That's the way that I've lived my life. And it's a predictor of the future when you look at the conduct towards this administration in the last few years.
Thank you. Susan Adams, do you oppose or approve of the huge pipeline from Canada to Mexico?
Huge pipeline, bad idea. Anybody can see what just happened in the Louisiana Gulf area with BP and drilling in just one area, and the massive devastation that was generated by that. Exxon Valdez and the loss of the oil, they're still cleaning up. My brother, who's a fisherman in the Aleutian chain, still says that they're finding oil under rocks in that area. I think that the way to go is what I said earlier. Use the example of Marin County in developing your own locally produced, locally generated clean energy program. Get off the fossil fuel grid. It's going to be cleaner, it's going to be closer to home, and it will be easier to manage than creating 1,700 miles of a pipeline that at some point fails, like what happened in San Bruno, and ends up causing all kinds of devastation to our environment, to our air, and to the health of the planet.
Thank you, Susan. Stacy, do you support or oppose this pipeline?
As I said before, I think we need to be very clear about breaking our addiction to foreign oil and fossil fuels. The longer we continue to invest in projects like this, as opposed to clean energy, we will continue to fuel our own addiction. So I am opposed to the pipeline, and I think the investment in a project like that should be directly targeted towards clean energy, renewables, alternative energy sources, and stimulating the green economy, again, both for job creation, as an economic imperative, for our environmental protection and our national security.
Thank you. William, your opinion on this?
I've expressed it several times this evening. Environmental collapse is a term that creates psychic numbing, and so we don't even want to talk about it. When you talk about forest canopies collapsing, that's an issue. When you're moving petroleum products around, the spills, the burning, the consumption, I mean, it's absolutely incredulous that this is being supported. The oil industry has a stranglehold on our Congress, it has a stranglehold on this nation, it has a stranglehold on the planet. This may require actions if it's, we have not had this before, but if the individuals of this country decide to amend the Constitution to address this, that's likely to be the only end run, because you'll not be able to get this through the special interests that make the decisions in Washington. So part of this job is to mobilize the experience here, the 600-mile coastline, for production of a zero CO2 energy policy, and take that message to the people and try to get it by the oil industry into a reality. And that is a huge problem.
Thank you, William. Tiffany, how do you feel about this pipeline?
It's certainly something that I oppose, and one of the things that I've been doing here in Sonoma County for several years is to reduce our dependence on foreign oil through energy efficiency programs. Sonoma County is a leader in energy independence programs. We are putting people to work, creating retrofits on homes and businesses, and preparing ourselves to be able to, hopefully at some point very soon, bring on clean power in Sonoma County. And that additionally will provide more jobs locally that we can reinvest instead of spending our money on dirty carbon energy, and reducing our need to have pipelines such as this in the future. So focusing on those programs here at home and using that as a model for the rest of the country is something that I will plan to do as the next Congresswoman.
Thank you.
Great. So we are getting a lot of questions and we're running out of time. So we're going to try for this next round. We're going to speed things up a bit. So we're going to do 30-second responses. The first question I'm going to go with is the top of the questions right now online. And the question is, starting with Jared, what can you do to reform local government pension problems? 30 seconds.
Wearing the hat of a state legislator, I have taken some big steps in that direction. Last year, we eliminated an entire suite of benefits that had been available for new employees. That's going to save quite a bit. We also renegotiated all of the bargaining agreements at the state level. We've got to go further. We want to have thoughtful pension reform, but the benefits that have been bargained for by local government are largely going to have to be rebargained for by local government. The state has begun and can do more, but primarily this is a burden of local government.
Thank you, Jared. Same question for Norman.
Yeah, well, as a federal legislator, I'd be most concerned with federal policy. And when it comes to, for instance, the Postal Service, I was proud to be with the union members demonstrating here in Sonoma County in defense of the postal workers who are under assault in many ways, including at the question of how the pensions are calculated in terms of long-term health care and the way in which the cooking of the books is being used to manipulate negotiation with postal workers who are our largest unionized workforce in the country. We need to defend their pensions and defend their unions.
Susan Adams?
Thank you. Actually, Sacramento hasn't done a very good job with pension reform or with giving local government the tools to expand our toolbox to be able to get to the bargaining table to offer other viable options in negotiations with our labor. We have an obligation to support and honor the contracts that were made with our employees that have worked for us for 25, 30 years, answering our 911 calls, going into burning buildings, fixing our potholes. But we need Sacramento to help us at local government expand the tool chest.
Thank you, Susan. Stacy, same question.
So I think the key here is just about fairness, that we all understand that our pensions currently are putting financial burdens on our budgets that were unexpected and that are non-viable going forward. I also think that labor understands this, and it's a matter of bringing both labor and management to the table and trying to find fair and equitable solutions. I'm not sure that's a federal issue per se. I think it will be worked out at the local level, but I think that having an air of fairness is one that's actually allowed us to make progress on this topic locally in the recent times.
Thank you, Stacy. Same question for William.
The identification that the pension funding at the federal level is in a multi-trillion-dollar shortfall, that's a lot of money to be short, and they were set up without a revenue stream to support it. There is going to be big problems going forward because we have such an incredible amount of debt that we're trying to carry that there's not enough money to run the government, so we're borrowing money, growing the debt to survive. That is a failed kind of long-term plan. A lot of the promises, a lot of the safety nets, they're evaporating. And the question is, we got to look at maybe the right to work, but maybe not the right to not work. And so there's going to be a shift in the way we take care of each other and those less fortunate by giving them the right.
Thank you, William. And Tiffany.
The issue of pension reform is not one of cuts, it's one of revenue. And at the local level, the real issue is Wall Street and predatory lending, and that's what's affected the local revenue. My grandmother and my grandfather had pensions, and she would have been destitute without it. Reducing pensions, in my opinion, is institutionalizing female poverty. And so I do think that we need to address the revenue side for local governments and not continue to erode the social contracts and the safety nets that people need at the end of their lives.
Thank you, Tiffany. Dan Roberts.
Yes. As my campaign unfolds, I will at every turn try to focus on federal issues as opposed to local issues. This is a local issue. Having said that, I'll comment on it. And that is, I wrote an op-ed piece or a guest editorial, you might call it, for the IJ recently. It was on pension plan reform. I wrote it because I have 25 years of investment, 40 years of total investment experience. And it says we need to look for leadership from all, and that we're not getting it.
Thank you, Dan. Well, it's been a great evening, and I can't believe how fast this has gone by. We've got so many questions still to ask, but we're just out of time. I want to thank the viewing audience for posting the questions. I want to thank the studio audience, and now we're going to go with closing comments. And by the draw, Jared Huffman is going to close first. Thank you, Jared.
Thank you, Jason and Connie, for this has been a great discussion. It's been great to connect with the viewers who are throughout this fantastic district. And I hope that I have been able to convey to you this evening something different about my campaign, because I'm running for Congress in a way that doesn't just talk about what I promised to do after I'm elected. I'm also telling you about things that I have done, because I have served in the job of being a legislator. I have actually passed laws, authored laws, that are creating clean energy jobs, that are helping restore our fisheries and rivers, that are helping protect our coasts from oil spills, that are doing many of these things we talk about, including taking on the health insurance companies over outrageous increases in our health premiums. People talk about the state of California spending more on prisons than on higher education. I've actually had a chance to do something about it. It took me 5 years, but I stopped the state from wasting $1.6 billion on a death row expansion at San Quentin. And there are many, many other examples of this that demonstrate that I'm a legislator that certainly has the right values to represent this district, but also a record of getting things done, which is what we need in Congress.
Thank you, Jared. And Norman.
Well, thanks to everybody for being part of this evening. We're living in extraordinary times. The crises are just sometimes seemingly overwhelming. And the traditional way of going up the political ladder has generally not served us well. One of my great heroes is Paul Wellstone, who talked about representing the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party. Well, Paul Wellstone had never held elective office before he became a U.S. Senator. The fact is that it's the grassroots organizing and social movements that have basically given us everything that we can be proud of in this country. Even some of our better legislators, I sometimes think of the story that was said about the first President Bush, born on third base, thinks he hit a triple. Quite often we have folks who are in legislative positions and they forget that it's really people at the grassroots who work hard, who do the organizing, who challenge conventional wisdom, who make the change. I've been doing that for 40 years and I want to do that in Congress.
Thank you, Norman. Susan Adams.
Well, anybody that wants to still ask me a question can go through my website, susanadamsforcongress.com, and I'm happy to answer any and all questions. And what I want to transmit to you is an appreciation for being here with us, to listen to us tonight, and to consider that we will each come to this job with a certain lens or a certain perspective. My lens is as a healer, as a nurse, as a professor, as an educator, as a mom and a grandmom. And I have spent more than 30 years of my career taking care of people and communities, the last 9 years serving at local government and bringing that vision of healthy planet, healthy people forward. I think that there is an illness right now in Sacramento, and my philosophy is send a nurse there and we'll heal the illness. I think that we need to work together as community. None of us here sitting here tonight are going to be able to do this alone. We're going to need to do this with your help. You will help inform and guide us in the policies. You will help and inform and guide me on what you'd like me to bring forward as your representative.
Thank you, Susan. Stacy.
I want to echo the thank you to Jason and Connie. It's wonderful for you to bring us together, and for all of you in the audience and who have been viewing this. It's this kind of dialogue, this kind of engaged discussion that will help us solve the problems that we face in Washington. I'm Stacey Lawson, and I'm running for Congress. I would like your vote. You can go to staceylawson.com to learn more about positions and to ask questions. I've spent the last 17 years at the center of innovation, economic development, entrepreneurship, and education, all of which I think are critical areas for us to get our economy back on track. I'm the only candidate in the race who has actually created thousands of jobs for the local Northern California economy, not just voted for them, but actually gone in and worked with entrepreneurs and small businesses, rolled up our sleeves, gotten funding, and put ecosystems and models in place for those companies to thrive. And I think that's a key skill set that we're lacking in Washington. And I look forward to bringing, in partnership with you, into our political dialogue.
Thank you, Stacy. William.
Also, I'd like to thank the two of you for hosting this. It was an excellent opportunity, and for the community for joining. And I don't envy your job of trying to sort this all out and making a decision going forward. I feel that what I bring to the table is an ability to solve problems. It doesn't take a psychiatrist to see that things are pretty crazy in Washington. We need very serious change. We need change in the debt. We need change in the environment. And it's a job to which I'm willing to commit 100% of my time. CourtneyForCongress.org. I think I'm the only organizational website out there. I don't understand this is not a commercial effort. That goes along with my idea that there should be term limits, that you go in there, you give it your best, and then you let someone else have a shot at it. I think that keeps the special interests at bay. They have to scramble more to keep up with people. I think these are all issues that need to be addressed and need to be addressed immediately.
Thank you, William. Tiffany.
Thank you both for hosting this important event, and thank you to the public for staying engaged with us. Please visit my website, tiffanyreneeforcongress.com, to continue the discussion, or follow me on Twitter. This GOP majority in Congress is using our tough economy to repeal 100 years of progress. And rather than address the inequities of our tax system, this Congress would cut out the very programs that provide services to our most vulnerable. Programs like Social Security, Veterans Administration, healthcare reform, and vital services that save lives. There's a war on the middle class, and China is spending 9% of its GDP on infrastructure, Europe 5%, and the US only 2%. We need to invest in America again by bringing home our troops, passing the transportation bill, an energy independence bill, and a jobs bill that invests in our aging infrastructure while reducing our dependence on coal and oil. As the only elected progressive in this race, I have the vision, the heart, and the experience to meet the needs of this new North Coast district as your next Congresswoman. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. Dan Roberts.
Yes, thank you very much. And again, thanks to Pixel and the North Coast Community Media for having us. I'm pleased to be in this fine group. I think we're all talented in various areas. We bring lots of skills to the potential job. In my case, I bring 25 years as running a business. I think there are probably two others who actually run businesses, meet payrolls, balance budgets, and produce some forward planning. So I think that's an important part of federal service today with our debt and deficit problem is to have businessmen at the table. I was elected, parenthetically, I work with under the SEC with FINRA, regulatory agency, and I was elected to represent 900 firms from the 13 western states. And that is to carry forward a regulatory review. That's what I do. Everything goes before the board we see. So that's how I get back to DC. Love to work full time at it. Thank you for your vote.
Thank you, Dan. As I mentioned at the beginning of the program, we did have another candidate who was not able to participate in the forum, but he did join us in the studio, and he was able to do an opening statement. Just as a reminder, if you want to learn more about Andy Caffrey, you can go to his website. That's caffreyforcongress.org. And I will now turn the closing comments to Connie.
Thank you, Jason. This has been a great deal of fun for me. I love good conversation. We have such smart people with good hearts and experience here. Thanks to the studio audience, the online audience, Pixel Corps for this wonderful new studio that we hope to be using more. And I just keep remembering Edward R. Murrow's closing line, which is, good night and good luck.
Thank you very much.